What if your life was never meant to be easy, but it was always meant to be meaningful? What if you were chosen not to be comfortable, but to carry something sacred? A message, a mission, a fire that no one else could hold. Jeremiah's story isn't just an ancient tale tucked into the pages of the Bible. It's a living, breathing journey of a man who was called to feel deeply, to speak boldly, and to stand alone when truth became too heavy for the world to carry. He didn't perform miracles. He didn't split seas. He didn't lead armies into battle. Instead, he wept. And through those tears, he revealed the heart of God. This is not a story for the faint of heart. It's for the sensitive, the spiritual, the seekers who have ever asked, "Why does this world feel so heavy on my shoulders?" It's for the ones who've spoken truth and been rejected, who've carried light into darkness and been met with silence. Jeremiah walked that road, and in many ways, so do we. In today's video, we're not just telling the story of a prophet. We're opening the door to a deeper reflection on calling, pain, faith, and the strange, holy beauty of being misunderstood by the world, but known deeply by God. Jeremiah's words still tremble through time, still whisper to the weary soul, still hold out a hand to those wondering if their struggle has purpose. So, as we begin, I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel, if you haven't already. This is a space for voices like yours, seekers, believers, and the quietly brave. And if Jeremiah's story touches something in you, if you've ever felt like you've cried for a world that doesn't want to change, leave a comment. Let this be more than a video. Let it be a conversation. Now take a deep breath and come with me into the soul of a prophet who never stopped feeling, never stopped warning, and never stopped believing that even tears can become sacred when offered in love. Jeremiah's story begins long before his birth, in a time and space beyond our understanding, where purpose was stitched into the very fabric of his soul. Imagine, if you will, a life not simply born from the physical, but one chosen, hand-picked, before the first breath was ever drawn. It's almost as if his existence was a deliberate, sacred act of destiny. That's the mystical truth we encounter in the life of Jeremiah. God spoke to him while he was still in his mother's womb, telling him that he was set apart for a purpose greater than anything he could have ever imagined. This wasn't a mere birth. This was a calling that pierced time itself, echoing through the ages. Can you even begin to fathom that? To be chosen before you even existed in this world. To have your life's blueprint sketched out before the world even knew your name. That's what makes Jeremiah's calling so powerful, and it's also what makes his story resonate so deeply with people today. Many of us walk through life feeling a sense of difference, of being apart from the crowd. Maybe you felt that quiet whisper in your heart, a feeling that you were meant for something bigger, something more significant than the everyday grind. It's as if, deep down, you've always known you were meant to do something that would leave an imprint on the world. You might not have asked for it. You might not have known how it would unfold, but that calling, it was always there. That's what the concept of divine preselection or soul contracts is all about. Before we ever take a step on this earth, before we even form a single memory, there's a greater force that places us here for a purpose. And sometimes, when you feel that pull, that calling, you begin to question, was I chosen for something I haven't even discovered yet? Have you ever felt that way? Like you're walking through life with a knowing that you're different, or that you have something to offer that hasn't fully revealed itself. Well, Jeremiah's life is a reflection of that. In a world where we often feel disconnected, where society pushes us to conform, Jeremiah stands as a beacon for those who feel like they don't fit in, like they're walking a path that others just don't understand. His life began with a divine purpose, and in many ways, that's the same for all of us. But how do we recognize it? How do we step into that calling when the world around us is spinning in chaos? That's the next part of Jeremiah's story, where his journey truly begins. The world around Jeremiah was in turmoil, to say the least. It was a time when the southern kingdom of Judah was on the brink of collapse, politically, spiritually, and socially. The kings were corrupt, the people were steeped in injustice, and there was a general sense of moral decay that seemed to seep into every corner of society. Imagine living in a world where your leaders no longer stand for truth, where the voices of the righteous are drowned out by the roar of greed, fear, and division. It was a time where people had forgotten the higher truths, and in their forgetfulness, they began to spiral towards destruction. Sound familiar? Jeremiah's message was a piercing cry in the midst of that chaos. He didn't just speak with words. He spoke with his very being. The weight of his words wasn't just an intellectual exercise. He wept. He cried for the people of Judah, for their brokenness, for their blindness to the path they were walking toward. It wasn't just a prophetic warning. It was a soul-deep grief. But despite all the warning, despite the depth of his passion and the truth he carried, his message was largely ignored. The people didn't want to hear it. They were too caught up in their own desires, too entrenched in their own power plays, to listen. Their hearts were hardened, and they chose to look the other way. This right here is where we start to feel the weight of Jeremiah's life in our own. Can you relate to that? How many times in your life have you spoken up, only to feel like your voice was lost in a sea of noise? How many times have you seen things happening in the world, things you knew were wrong, but felt powerless to change them? In a world that seems to be crumbling under the weight of injustice, inequality, and corruption, it can sometimes feel like no matter how loud we shout, no one is listening. But here's the thing. Jeremiah didn't give up. Despite the rejection, despite the ridicule, despite the overwhelming forces of decay that seemed unstoppable, he kept speaking. He kept warning. He kept standing for truth, even if it meant standing alone. And while we may not be prophets in the traditional sense, many of us find ourselves in situations where we are called to speak out against injustice, to stand up for what's right, even when it feels like no one else is paying attention. The collapse of Judah and the rise of the Babylonian Empire that followed is a sobering reminder of what can happen when we ignore truth. But even in the midst of this spiritual and political collapse, Jeremiah's words serve as a timeless warning. And that's where the modern parallel hits home. The noise of the world today is just as loud, the distractions just as overwhelming. It's easy to get lost in the chaos, to feel like our voices don't matter in the grand scheme of things. But what if the very reason we feel that pull to speak up, to act differently, to challenge the status quo, is because we are part of a greater calling, one that is much bigger than us? We live in a time where the voices of truth are often drowned out by the constant bombardment of opinions, media, and self-interest. Much like Jeremiah, Many of us can see what's happening in the world today. The rise of division, the neglect of the marginalized, the distortion of truth, the falsehoods peddled for profit. It feels like we're on the brink of something, doesn't it? It's a feeling that many spiritual seekers, thinkers, and activists are sensing right now. They know that the world can't continue down this path without consequences. Jeremiah's warnings were not just for his time. They echo down through the generations, and they speak to us now. He stands as a spiritual alarm bell, urging us to wake up, to see the bigger picture, to look beyond the noise and reconnect with what really matters. The question is, will we heed that call? Will we be willing to stand up, like Jeremiah, even if it means standing alone at times? Will we speak truth, even when others would rather ignore it? In the end, Jeremiah's story is about more than just a man who prophesied in a time of turmoil. It's about the power of one individual's voice to challenge the course of history. It's about the truth that resides within us all, waiting to be expressed, no matter the cost. It's about having the courage to be different, to stand out, and to carry the weight of a calling that transcends time and space. So, next time you feel that sense of being called, that deep knowing inside you that you are meant for something more, remember Jeremiah. His life was a testament to the power of stepping into your purpose, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's unpopular. And just like him, you may find that the greatest impact you have on the world comes not from blending in, but from standing boldly for truth. Jeremiah's life was not just marked by words, but by an overwhelming depth of emotion that radiated from his very soul. He wasn't merely a prophet who spoke at people. He was a man who felt every word that came from his lips, and that, perhaps more than anything else, is why we remember him as the weeping prophet. His tears weren't just tears of sorrow. They were tears of empathy, of deep spiritual mourning, and of heartbreak that mirrored the heart of God himself. Can you imagine living in a world where every injustice you witness, every broken relationship, every moment of human suffering cuts you to your very core? That's the weight Jeremiah carried. He wasn't a detached observer looking from the outside in. He was right there in the thick of it, feeling the pulse of pain, the sting of rejection, the emptiness of spiritual decay. And his tears were not just a reflection of his own grief. They were the outpouring of a heart that felt the anguish of a nation in the process of crumbling under its own weight. What does it mean to be so attuned to the world's pain? To be so deeply empathic that the suffering of others becomes your own? For some, this might feel familiar. Perhaps you've been there, feeling the world's heartache as your own, carrying the burdens of others like they were your own personal cross to bear. If you've ever walked through life as an empath or a healer, you know what it's like to feel the raw emotions of others so intensely that they can overwhelm you. You might have asked yourself, why does it hurt so much? Why do I feel everything so deeply? Well, in Jeremiah's case, his tears were not just his own. His weeping was a spiritual calling, a reflection of God's heartbreak over a lost people. As he walked the streets of Judah, his heart broke for the people who refused to listen to the message of hope and repentance he brought. He saw the injustice, the greed, and the selfishness that permeated society, and he wept. But it wasn't just sorrowful tears that fell from his eyes. It was the kind of weeping that comes from a soul in mourning, like the weeping of a parent watching their child make decisions that will hurt them in the long run. It's the kind of grief that lingers long after the tears have dried, the kind of sadness that seems to settle deep in the bones. Jeremiah's lamentations echo through history as some of the most profound expressions of spiritual sorrow. In one of his laments, he says, "Oh, that my head were waters, and my eyes a fountain of tears, that I might weep day and night for the slain of the daughter of my people." Imagine that. A heart so burdened with grief that the very thought of the people's suffering turns his eyes into rivers, flowing endlessly with sorrow. This wasn't just poetic language. It was a visceral outpouring of love and pain. His weeping was his prophetic mission. In the face of a hardening nation, his tears were the last hope for a people who had forgotten how to feel. For those of us who have been touched by the struggles of others, or who have found ourselves bearing the weight of the world's sorrow, Jeremiah's story offers a profound insight. Feeling deeply, as painful as it may be, is a divine gift. It's easy to wish away the heaviness of emotional sensitivity. It's easy to close off, to guard our hearts so that the weight of the world doesn't crush us. But what if, like Jeremiah, our deep emotions are meant to call attention to something greater, something deeper? What if our tears, the very ones that seem so overwhelming, are actually the heartbeats of compassion that echo in the divine's ear? What if they're part of our own calling to be healers, spiritual warriors, and empaths in this world? Jeremiah's tears were not a sign of weakness. They were a sign of his strength. They were a testament to the depth of his connection to the divine and to the people he was called to serve. And just as his heart broke for them, so too does the heart of the Creator break for us when we suffer. In our world today, where suffering often feels like it's inescapable, where so many cry out for justice and healing, let Jeremiah's story remind us that our tears have a purpose. They are sacred. They are a call to action. They are a pathway to transformation. And speaking of transformation, Jeremiah's story doesn't stop at the tears. It's in these moments of deep sorrow that God offers something unexpected, something mysterious. We enter a new phase of Jeremiah's journey, one that leads us into the powerful spiritual symbolism of the potter and the clay. In this pivotal chapter of his life, we find the divine metaphor that would shape not only his prophetic mission, but our understanding of divine sovereignty and human transformation. In the book of Jeremiah, chapter 18, God calls him to the potter's house. It's here, in the humble place where clay is shaped and molded, that God speaks to Jeremiah about the nature of divine power and human choice. God shows Jeremiah a potter working with clay, a seemingly simple act, yet one that carries profound meaning. The potter takes the clay, shapes it, reshapes it, and if it becomes flawed in the process, the potter molds it again, giving it new form. And God says to Jeremiah, "Like the clay in the potter's hand, so are you in my hand." This is not just about clay. This is about you. This is about me. This is about all of us. What does it mean to be like clay in the hands of the divine potter? It means that we are not fixed in place, not stagnant or set in stone. We are in constant flux, constantly being shaped, molded, and reshaped by the hand of God. But here's the catch. This process isn't always comfortable. Clay, after all, is softened, stretched, and sometimes even broken down before it can be reformed. And when we look at our lives, especially the times when we've experienced suffering, loss, or failure, How often do we resist this process of being reshaped? How often do we fight the very breaking that is necessary for our renewal? What if every breaking in your life was actually a reshaping? What if every painful moment, every heartache, every seemingly devastating setback was part of a greater plan to shape you into something stronger, more beautiful, more aligned with your true self? The potter doesn't discard the clay when it becomes imperfect. No, the potter takes the flawed, the cracked, the broken pieces and molds them into something new, something better, something greater than it could ever be on its own. This idea of transformation, of surrendering to the divine hand, is both terrifying and liberating. It challenges us to trust, to let go of control, and to allow ourselves to be molded by forces greater than ourselves. In the process, we may face trials, but these trials are not the end. They are the beginning of something beautiful, something divinely orchestrated. And just as God promised Judah that despite their sin and destruction, there would be a chance for renewal, so too does he promise us that every hardship is part of a greater plan. There's always an opportunity for healing, for growth, and for grace. So as you reflect on your own life, think about the times you felt broken. Have those moments been a sign of defeat? Or could they be an invitation for renewal? Could the breaking you've experienced be part of a greater transformation, a reshaping of your spirit by the hands of the divine potter? Like clay in the hands of a master, you are being molded, sometimes gently, sometimes with force, but always with purpose. And in that process, you are becoming who you were always meant to be. In the midst of all the darkness, in the midst of a world falling apart, where every corner seemed to echo with the sound of judgment, there was one voice that carried a message of hope, and that was the voice of Jeremiah. While the world around him was crumbling, while the people he loved were spiraling into ruin, Jeremiah's prophecies reached beyond the impending destruction. His message was not just one of condemnation, but of transformation. It was a message that pointed forward, past the pain, past the punishment, to a time when everything would be made new. A new covenant, a new relationship between God and humanity, a promise of hope for the future. The people of Judah were about to face the consequences of their actions. There was no denying that the judgment was coming. And yet, in the heart of Jeremiah's words, something remarkable stood out. He didn't just talk about the end. He talked about the beginning of something new, a new way of relating to God. In the book of Jeremiah, we find one of the most profound promises that would echo through the ages. "The days are coming," declares the Lord, "when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people." Jeremiah 31:33-34. This was not just a message for the people of his time. It was a glimpse into the future, a promise of a new way of being, a new kind of relationship with the divine. No longer would the law be something external, written on stone tablets, something people had to follow out of obligation or fear. Instead, it would be something internal, something written on their very hearts. It would no longer be about following rules. It would be about living in a relationship with God, where his law would become part of who they were, guiding them from the inside out. Can you imagine that? A time when love, not fear, would be the guiding force of humanity. A time when the truth would not be something we simply try to follow, but something that flows naturally from the core of who we are. It's the kind of transformation that not only changes the heart, it changes the world. And Jeremiah, in his moment of deepest sorrow, was prophesying this new beginning. He was pointing to a future where the old order of things, of fear and external rules, would be replaced with a new covenant of love, grace, and intimate relationship. For those of us living today, this promise holds just as much power. It speaks to a deep longing within us for connection, for something more than religion, something deeper, more real. It's a reminder that even in our darkest moments, there's always the potential for new beginnings, for renewal. Just like the people of Judah, we too are in need of transformation, but that transformation isn't about fear. It's about love, it's about trust, and it's about surrender. The new covenant Jeremiah spoke of wasn't just about a change in the way we relate to God. It was about a fundamental shift in how we see ourselves and the world around us. But Jeremiah's message wasn't just one of promise and hope. It came with a heavy price, and this next chapter of his life, the one that truly tests the soul, shows us the price of truth-telling in a world that doesn't want to listen. Jeremiah's life wasn't easy. He wasn't welcomed. He wasn't celebrated. He was ridiculed. He was isolated. He was beaten. And worse yet, he was thrown into a pit, a literal pit, as if his words, his calling, his very existence could be buried away. But despite all of this, Jeremiah didn't stop. He didn't give up. He didn't turn away from his purpose. He kept going, even when no one believed in him, even when the cost of truth seemed too great. It's easy to look at Jeremiah's life and feel sorry for him. But what if his suffering wasn't just a tragic story? It was a lesson in spiritual endurance. What if his persistence was the very thing that can inspire us to keep going, even when it feels like the world is against us? When we face our own trials, our own moments of feeling misunderstood or persecuted, Jeremiah's story calls us to reflect on what it means to persevere. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where no one believed in you, where everyone around you told you to give up, to stop, to quit, where the road ahead seemed so lonely, so difficult, that you thought there was no point in continuing? We all face moments where our faith is tested, where the world doesn't understand our journey, where our purpose feels like it's just too heavy to bear. And yet, just like Jeremiah, we are called to keep going, to keep speaking truth, even when the world isn't listening, to keep doing the work that we are meant to do, even when it seems like no one sees it. Jeremiah's perseverance teaches us that the soul is stronger than the body, that faith, when rooted deep enough, can withstand the storms of ridicule, persecution, and rejection. It's a reminder that we are not defined by our suffering, but by our ability to rise above it, to continue walking in faith, even when the path is unclear. What have you continued doing, even when no one believed in you? What purpose have you carried, despite the odds stacked against you? Jeremiah's life shows us that even when we feel alone, even when we feel broken, there is something inside us that can push forward. There is something divine that will not let us quit. And in the end, what we learn from Jeremiah's story is not just about his struggles. It's about the power of truth, the resilience of faith, and the unwavering call to live out our purpose no matter the cost. His voice didn't die when he was silenced. It didn't fade when he was cast away. No, his voice continues to speak. His warnings still echo in our hearts, and his message of hope continues to inspire those who are willing to listen. Jeremiah is not just a figure from the past. His voice speaks to us today. His challenges, his heartache, his victories, these are all part of a greater narrative, one that still unfolds in our lives. We are all, in some ways, vessels in the potter's hands, being shaped, being molded, being called to speak truth, even when it's hard, even when it costs us everything. As you reflect on the life of Jeremiah, take a moment to ask yourself, what is the truth that you are being called to speak? What is the purpose that still burns within you, even when the world tries to quiet it? What are the tears, the burdens, the hardships in your life that are leading you to a deeper transformation? Take a moment to listen to the still, small voice within. Write, pray, meditate. Let the life of Jeremiah awaken something in you, a courage to keep going, a willingness to speak truth, and a faith that never wavers. May your tears be sacred, may your soul be seen, and may you always have the courage to speak truth, even when it costs everything.